Welcome to Nation Scope, where power, ambition, and history collide in ways that still shape our world today. This is the true story of how a sovereign island kingdom, thriving, strategic, and internationally recognized, was taken over without a traditional war. No massive invasion. No battlefield victory. Just pressure, money, guns in the shadows, and signatures on paper. Stay with this story to the end, because Hawaii didn't just fall, it was taken. Long before Hawaii became a vacation dream plastered across postcards and Instagram feeds, it was something far more powerful, and far more dangerous to ignore. It was a fully independent kingdom, strategically planted in the center of the Pacific Ocean like a jewel that every empire eventually noticed. Hawaii was not discovered by the United States. It was not found. It was already there, already ruled, already trading with the world. By the late 1700s, the Hawaiian Islands were unified under King Kamehameha I, a warrior statesman who did what few leaders in history ever manage. He brought warring islands together under one crown. Through diplomacy, alliances, and brutal warfare when necessary, Kamehameha created a centralized Hawaiian kingdom that commanded respect across the Pacific. This was not a primitive society waiting to be civilized. It was a nation with laws, traditions, religion, and an evolving political system. Hawaii's location made it invaluable. Any ship crossing the Pacific, from Asia to the Americas, needed a place to rest, resupply, and repair. Whaling ships stopped there. Merchants stopped there. Naval powers eyed it carefully. The British came. The French came. And eventually the Americans arrived, not with armies but with Bibles, contracts, and sugar. The first Americans to sink deep roots into Hawaii were Protestant missionaries in the early 1800s. Officially, they came to save souls. Unofficially, many of them laid the foundation for something far more permanent. These missionaries learned the Hawaiian language, gained the trust of royalty, and integrated themselves into the highest levels of society. Over time, their children stopped preaching and started doing business. Sugar changed everything. By the mid-19th century, sugar plantations exploded across the islands. Hawaii's climate was perfect, and American businessmen knew it. Vast tracts of land were converted into plantations owned not by native Hawaiians, but by white American elites who had settled there permanently. These men became incredibly wealthy and incredibly powerful. But there was a problem. Hawaii was still an independent kingdom. That independence meant Hawaiian kings and queens could set tariffs, control land ownership, and protect native political power. For American plantation owners, this was unacceptable. They wanted U.S. protection, U.S. military backing, and most importantly, duty-free access to American markets. To get that, Hawaii needed to be controlled, not respected. The Hawaiian monarchy tried to modernize to survive. King Kamehameha III established a constitutional monarchy. Western-style laws were introduced. Hawaii was internationally recognized by major powers including Britain and France. Embassies were opened. Treaties were signed. By every legal and diplomatic standard of the time, Hawaii was a legitimate sovereign nation. But legitimacy doesn't stop greed. As American business interests grew, so did their influence over Hawaiian politics. Wealth translated into pressure. Pressure translated into control. Slowly, Hawaiian rulers found themselves surrounded by advisors who did not have Hawaii's best interests at heart. Then came the turning point. In 1887, a group of armed American businessmen and militia members forced King Kalakaua to sign what became known as the Bayonet Constitution. The name wasn't symbolic, it was literal. The king signed it under threat of violence. This new constitution stripped the monarchy of real power and handed it to a legislature dominated by American and European elites. Even worse, it imposed property and income requirements that effectively removed voting rights from most native Hawaiians. This was not conquest by invasion. This was conquest by paperwork and intimidation. Hawaii was still technically independent, but only on paper. When King Kalakaua died, his sister, Queen Liliuokalani, took the throne. She was intelligent, determined, and fully aware that her kingdom was slipping away. Unlike her predecessors, she refused to accept a future where Hawaiians were strangers in their own land. She moved to restore the monarchy's authority and return power to native Hawaiians. That decision sealed her fate. The American businessmen who controlled Hawaii's economy saw her as a threat. Not just to profits, but to the entire system they had built. They knew that if the Queen succeeded, their grip on Hawaii would weaken. And so they began to plan something far more radical than another constitution. They planned a coup. And the United States, watching closely from across the ocean, was about to decide whose side it was really on. Queen Liliuokalani did not inherit a peaceful throne. When she became monarch in 1891, Hawaii was already under siege, not by foreign armies, but by foreign interests embedded deep inside its political and economic system. She understood something many rulers before her had tried to deny: Hawaii was being hollowed out from within. And unless that stopped, the kingdom would not survive another generation. Liliuokalani was not naive. She had spent years inside the royal court, watching how American businessmen maneuvered, how they spoke the language of reform, while stripping Hawaiians of power, and how the so-called bayonet constitution had turned her brother into a figurehead. That document haunted her reign from the very first day. It was illegal by moral standards, coerced by force, and devastating in its effects. Native Hawaiians, once the political heart of the islands, were now a marginalized majority, ruled by a legislature that answered not to the crown but to sugar money. The Queen believed that sovereignty was not something to be negotiated away quietly. She believed it was her duty to restore what had been stolen under threat of violence. Her plan was bold but lawful: draft a new constitution that would return authority to the monarchy and restore voting rights to native Hawaiians. She did not plan a rebellion. She planned a correction. But the men who controlled Hawaii's plantations and banks heard something else entirely. They heard danger. The Committee of Safety, a small group of powerful American businessmen and lawyers, had already decided that the Hawaiian monarchy was incompatible with their goals. Many of them were descendants of missionaries. They spoke Hawaiian. They lived on Hawaiian land. But their loyalty was not to the islands, it was to the United States and to profit. To them, Liliuokalani was not a queen defending her people. She was an obstacle. The moment the Queen announced her intention to introduce a new constitution, the machinery of overthrow began to move. Newspapers, owned or influenced by American interests, began publishing stories painting the Queen as unstable and dangerous. Rumors spread that she planned to abolish democracy, imprison opponents, and rule as a tyrant. None of it was true. But truth mattered less than perception. Fear was useful. Fear justified action. Behind closed doors, the Committee of Safety coordinated with U.S. officials in Hawaii, including John L. Stevens, the American minister to the islands. Stevens was not a neutral diplomat. He believed openly that Hawaii should belong to the United States. He had said so publicly. And now, with the Queen pushing back, he saw his moment. In January 1893, events moved quickly. The Committee of Safety claimed, without evidence, that American lives and property were in danger. This claim triggered a critical response. Acting on his own authority, Stevens ordered U.S. Marines from the USS Boston to land in Honolulu. They marched through the city in full uniform, carrying rifles, and positioned themselves near government buildings. This was not an invasion in name. But in reality, it was a show of force meant to tip the balance. The Queen had loyal supporters. She had the Royal Guard. She had the legal authority to act. But she also understood something far more important than pride. Any resistance would give the United States the excuse it wanted. Bloodshed would justify annexation. Violence would erase sympathy. And so she made a decision that would define her legacy and break her heart. She yielded. Not because she believed the coup was legitimate, but because she believed the United States government, once informed, would correct the injustice. She stepped aside under protest, trusting that international law and American principles would prevail. Her official statement made it clear: she surrendered her authority temporarily, not permanently, and only to avoid violence. The Committee of Safety wasted no time. They declared the Hawaiian monarchy over and established a provisional government, dominated entirely by American businessmen. Sanford B. Dole, yes, from the same family name that would later dominate fruit markets, was installed as president. The Hawaiian flag was lowered. The Queen was removed from power in her own palace. All of this happened without a single shot fired. But make no mistake, this was not peaceful. It was surgical. Hawaii's Queen had been deposed by a foreign-backed coup carried out by civilians, protected by U.S. Marines and justified by lies. And now the fate of the islands rested not in Honolulu, but in Washington, D.C. The conspirators believed annexation was inevitable. They believed America would welcome the islands with open arms. They believed history was already on their side. They were wrong, at least at first. Because when news of the overthrow reached the United States, a political battle erupted that no one in Hawaii fully expected. A new president was about to take office. And unlike his predecessor, he was not eager to steal a kingdom. And that hesitation would briefly give Hawaii one last chance to reclaim what had been taken. When news of the Hawaiian overthrow reached Washington, it arrived wrapped in confidence. The provisional government in Honolulu expected swift approval, formal annexation, and a quiet end to the story. After all, they believed they had done everything right. No chaos, no mass violence, and a convenient justification built on the supposed need to protect American lives and property. In their minds, Hawaii was already lost. The only thing left was paperwork. But American politics had a sense of timing that disrupted their plans. In March 1893, just weeks after the coup, Grover Cleveland was sworn in as President of the United States. Cleveland was many things: stubborn, conservative, deeply committed to constitutional principles, but above all he was skeptical of imperial expansion. Unlike politicians who saw overseas territory as America's destiny, Cleveland believed annexation without consent was immoral and illegal. When representatives of the provisional government arrived in Washington seeking annexation, Cleveland did something unexpected. He paused. Rather than rubber-stamp the takeover, he withdrew the annexation treaty from the Senate and ordered an official investigation into what had actually happened in Hawaii. This decision shocked the conspirators. They had assumed American power would shield them. Instead, the president was asking uncomfortable questions. Cleveland appointed James Henderson Blunt as a special commissioner and sent him to Hawaii with sweeping authority. Blunt was not sent to negotiate. He was sent to uncover the truth. He interviewed witnesses, reviewed documents, and examined the role of U.S. officials in the overthrow. What he found was devastating. The Blunt report concluded that the overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani was illegal. It stated plainly that U.S. Minister John L. Stevens had abused his authority, ordered the landing of troops without justification, and directly aided the coup. The presence of American Marines, the report said, intimidated the Queen and made resistance impossible. In short, the United States had participated in the overthrow of a sovereign government. President Cleveland was furious. In a message to Congress, he described the events in Hawaii as an act of war committed without authorization. He acknowledged that the Queen had yielded her authority specifically in reliance on American justice. And then he did something almost unheard of in U.S. foreign policy. He tried to reverse the coup. Cleveland demanded that the provisional government step aside and restore Queen Liliuokalani to the throne. He believed that anything less would stain the nation's honor. For a brief moment in history, it seemed possible that Hawaii's monarchy might be reinstated and the damage undone. But the story did not end there. The provisional government in Hawaii refused. Sanford Dole and his allies rejected Cleveland's demand outright. They argued that the Queen was unfit to rule and that restoring her would cause instability. In reality, they knew that time was their greatest weapon. If they could hold power long enough, Cleveland would be gone. Another president would come. And that president might see Hawaii not as a crime, but as an opportunity. The U.S. Congress was divided. Some senators agreed with Cleveland. Others saw Hawaii as strategically essential. The Pacific was becoming a theater of global competition. European empires were expanding. Japan was rising. Naval power mattered more than ever. Hawaii, sitting at the center of the ocean, was a prize too valuable to give up. While politicians argued in Washington, life in Hawaii grew darker. The provisional government consolidated power. Native Hawaiians were pushed further out of political life. Public resistance grew, but it was carefully suppressed. American business interests tightened their grip on land and resources. The message was clear: the old kingdom was not coming back. In 1894, the conspirators made a decisive move. They declared the Republic of Hawaii. This new republic was not the result of a popular vote. Native Hawaiians were largely excluded. Voting requirements ensured that power stayed firmly in the hands of American and European elites. Sanford Dole became president, not by democratic mandate but by design. Queen Liliuokalani was still alive, still present, still a symbol of resistance. In 1895, a failed counter-revolution by royalist supporters gave the republic the excuse it needed. The Queen was arrested, tried by a military tribunal, and imprisoned in her own palace. She was forced to formally abdicate the throne under threat that her supporters would be executed. It was the final humiliation of a monarch who had tried to save her nation without spilling blood. When Cleveland's term ended, Hawaii's fate was no longer uncertain. A new president would soon enter the White House, one who believed deeply in American expansion, naval dominance, and the idea that the United States was destined to rule beyond its borders. And for Hawaii, that change would mean the end of the kingdom forever. By 1897, the political winds in Washington had shifted dramatically. William McKinley, a Republican and a firm believer in expansion, occupied the White House. Unlike Cleveland, McKinley saw Hawaii not as a question of legality or morality, but as a strategic asset. a jewel in the Pacific, perfectly positioned for trade, naval power and future military operations. To him, Hawaii was too valuable to remain independent. Its location was essential for fueling the United States' ambitions in the Pacific, especially as tensions with Spain over Cuba and the Philippines began to simmer. Meanwhile, the Republic of Hawaii, led by Sanford Dole, had become a well-oiled political machine. The provisional government's promise of stability, economic growth, and U.S. alignment made it appealing to Washington's expansionist policymakers. They framed the issue not as a theft of sovereignty but as a mutually beneficial arrangement. Sugar exports to the mainland would flourish without tariffs, and America would gain a strategic foothold in the Pacific. The Queen's claims of illegality were increasingly portrayed as sentimental or irrelevant. The lesson of history as it was told was that progress and prosperity required control. For the people of Hawaii, the reality was devastating. Native Hawaiians, already marginalized, saw their land concentrated in the hands of American businessmen. Resistance was dangerous. Uprisings were ruthlessly suppressed. Every attempt to reclaim sovereignty was met with military force or legal obstacles. Queen Liliuokalani lived under watch, her authority stripped entirely, her palace a gilded cage. Her abdication, though coerced, had become the official seal on the end of Hawaii's monarchy. The islands were no longer governed by a native ruler, they were ruled by a government designed to pave the way for annexation. Then came the Spanish-American War in 1898, a conflict that reshaped the world and created an unprecedented opening for the United States. Suddenly, Hawaii's strategic value became undeniable. The islands were ideally positioned as a refueling station and naval base for operations in the Pacific, particularly near the Philippines and Asia. American military planners no longer saw Hawaii as a distant, exotic kingdom, they saw it as a linchpin in global power. Sanford Dole seized the moment. Leveraging the war as a justification, he pressed for immediate annexation. Arguments that had been theoretical suddenly became urgent. If the United States didn't formally claim Hawaii, other powers, Japan, Germany, even Britain, might intervene. Washington's politicians, previously hesitant, were convinced that America could not afford to let Hawaii slip away. In July 1898, the U.S. Congress passed a resolution of annexation. Hawaiian sovereignty, which had survived centuries, fell on paper in a single legislative act. Hawaii became a formal territory of the United States. No foreign invasion, no treaty signed by the Queen herself, just the strategic alignment of politics, money and military might. For the native population the result was catastrophic. Their land, their governance and their political identity were now subsumed under a foreign power. Queen Liliuokalani, still alive, accepted the reality with dignity. She formally protested, appealing to international law, to the people of the world, and to the conscience of the United States. But her words carried little weight against the tide of political expedience. She remained a figure of moral authority, a symbol of a kingdom erased without traditional war, a nation taken not by bullets but by bureaucracy, threats, and opportunism. Hawaii's transformation was swift and dramatic. U.S. military bases were established. Plantation owners solidified their wealth. The American flag flew over Iolani Palace, once the symbol of a thriving independent monarchy. Economically and strategically, the annexation was a success for the United States, but for the native Hawaiian people, it was a loss that resonates to this day. What happened in Hawaii was a masterclass in power, patience, and manipulation. It was not conquest in the traditional sense, with armies clashing and cities burning. It was a conquest of law, influence, and opportunity, a calculated takeover that left the islands politically intact but culturally and sovereignly shattered. By the end of the 19th century, Hawaii's fate was sealed. The kingdom that had survived centuries of internal conflict and foreign attention had been dismantled from within. Queen Liliuokalani's monarchy, the embodiment of Hawaiian sovereignty, was gone forever. And the United States had secured a critical stepping stone toward becoming a global power. Yet the story was far from over. Hawaii's journey did not end with annexation. The islands would face decades of transformation, resistance, and the quiet struggle to preserve a culture nearly erased. The echoes of that takeover are still felt in Hawaii today, in politics, in land rights disputes, in cultural revival movements, and in the stories of a people who remember what was taken from them. Hawaii's story is more than just a footnote in American history. It is a cautionary tale of how power, money, and politics can erase a nation without firing a single shot. From a proud, independent kingdom with a queen determined to defend her people, to a U.S. territory controlled by foreign interests, Hawaii's journey shows how sovereignty can be stripped quietly, legally, and methodically. Queen Liliuokalani's courage and dignity remain a beacon for native Hawaiians today. Her resistance, even in the face of overwhelming pressure, reminds us that justice is not always immediate, but history remembers the truth. The island's people endured land loss, cultural suppression, and political marginalization, but they never fully surrendered their identity. The annexation of Hawaii was more than a political maneuver, It was a turning point that helped shape the United States into a global power, while leaving deep scars on the people and culture it absorbed. And even today the debate over sovereignty, reparations and cultural preservation continues, proving that history is never truly behind us. It lives on in the land, the people, and the stories we pass down. So next time you think of Hawaii, remember, it is more than paradise. It is a kingdom that fought for its survival, a queen who refused to bow, and a lesson in how the tides of power can reshape the world quietly, efficiently, and forever. This is Nation Scope, where we uncover the truths behind the stories that shape nations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell because the real history is always deeper than the picture you see.